Welcome to the Podkey summary of Adventure Time. Adventure Time looked like a sugar rush fantasy, but underneath it was quietly building one of the strangest and most emotionally rich worlds on TV. Part of what made it stick was that everything worked together. The post-apocalyptic setting, the loose handmade production style, the real emotional weight, and a mythology that kept deepening without losing its weird little jokes. And then there's the aftershock of it all. From queer representation in kids' animation to the ridiculous number of future creators who passed through that show. One of the smartest things Adventure Time did was hide its bleakest idea in plain sight. This colorful land of candy people and stretchy dogs is also the long aftermath of nuclear catastrophe, the Mushroom War, with the story set roughly 1,000 years after civilization was wiped out. Pendleton Ward mostly kept that history implicit. You'd see buried cars or ruined leftovers of the old world in the background, and the show would just keep moving. That restraint mattered. He felt the world was more compelling when it danced around its darkest backstory. And honestly, that's exactly why it lingers. The setting also gave the series unusual freedom. Once magic comes back after the bombs, the show can slide between science fiction, fantasy, horror, comedy, and coming-of-age stories without acting like those are separate modes. It means a silly episode can suddenly feel eerie, or heartbreaking, or cosmic, and somehow it still feels like the same show. A lot of that texture came from how the show was made. Adventure Time used a storyboard-driven production process, which meant storyboard artists weren't just drawing scenes from a finished script. They were effectively writing too, shaping dialogue, action, jokes, rhythm, all of it. That's a big deal, because it lets the final thing feel less like it was designed in neat compartments and more like it grew organically. Cartoon Network gave the team room to develop episodes through boards and animatics, and Rob Sorcher described that as a way for visual artists to learn by actually doing the work. The model also pulled in younger artists and indie comics creators, people with more idiosyncratic instincts and, in some cases, more openly spiritual or offbeat ideas than you'd usually get in a conventional TV pipeline. That helped make the series feel less polished in the corporate sense and more alive in the creative sense, which is usually a better trade. For all its absurd humor, Adventure Time took pain seriously. The show dealt with grief, trauma, loneliness, memory loss, mental illness, and the long consequences of the Mushroom War, but it rarely stopped and announced that it was doing something important. It just let those feelings live inside the comedy and the surreal visuals, which made them hit harder. The clearest example is Ice King. He starts as this chaotic, sometimes threatening weirdo, and over time you learn he was Simon Petrikov, a person eroded by the crown's damage into confusion and loss. That transformation was praised for feeling psychologically plausible, and Lev Grossman connected Simon's memory loss to his own father's Alzheimer's disease. That tells you something important about the show. It wasn't just emotionally effective for kids. Adults were finding their own grief and fear in it too. Ward called the series a dark comedy built around ambivalent emotions, feelings that can be happy and frightening at the same time. That's basically Adventure Time in one sentence. Another big part of the show's legacy is how it handled queer representation. The relationship between Marceline and Princess Bubblegum lived for years in subtext and fan interpretation, with viewers deeply invested in what became known as Bubline. Then the series gradually made that relationship explicit, culminating in their kiss in the 2018 finale. That didn't happen by accident. Rebecca Sugar and other artists were pushing LGBTQ+ themes into children's animation, at first using subtext to get around executive resistance, and later bringing those themes more clearly into the foreground. The show also pushed more broadly against narrow gender categories. Academic analysis points to characters like BMO, Fiona and Cake, and Princess Bubblegum, and to the way traditionally gendered traits are spread all over the ensemble instead of assigned neatly by type. In other words, the world of OU made room for people and identities that children's animation had often treated as too risky or too confusing, which turned out to be a pretty low estimate of what audiences could handle. It's still kind of wild that a show with 11-minute episodes built such a dense canonical mythology. Over time, it layered in the Mushroom War, the Lich, long-running emotional arcs, hidden histories, and a sense that almost every silly corner of the world might connect to something bigger. The trick was that it never gave up its episodic surrealism. It could wander, joke, detour, and still keep feeding the larger story. Later miniseries like Stakes, Islands, and Elements gave the show more room to expand that mythology without changing its basic identity. And the finale handled something a lot of long-running fandom shows: fumble. It didn't try to solve absolutely everything in one giant panic. By resolving smaller arcs beforehand, Come Along With Me could focus on the major emotional beats and on glimpses of possible futures, including OU, 1,000 years later. That ending felt expansive instead of overstuffed, which is rare. Usually finales either sprint or freeze. This one mostly breathed. Adventure Time also blew past the idea that it was just a kid's cartoon. A 2016 New York Times analysis found that just over 2/3 of its Facebook likes came from people aged 18 to 24. The ratings tell part of that story too. The 2010 premiere drew about 2.5 million viewers, and by the 5th season premiere, it was above 3.4 million before later dropping off, as Cartoon Network changed its scheduling and the audience itself got older. But even when ratings shifted, the fandom stayed huge online through fan art, theory culture, cosplay, merchandise, comics, games, and convention life. That turned a short-form animated series into one of the decade's major TV phenomena, the kind of show people didn't just watch but inhabited. Then there's the talent pipeline, which is almost absurd when you list it out. People who worked on Adventure Time went on to create Steven Universe, Over the Garden Wall, Clarence, Summer Camp Island, OKKO, and other major shows, while its broader influence reached series like Regular Show as part of the same creative wave. Slate called it an animation gold rush, and that captures the feeling. Studios started paying more attention to distinctive artists from outside the old television track, especially indie comics talent. That influence even spilled back into comics, where critics noticed less gloomy, masculine small press introspection and more colorful fantasy, talking animals, and big invented mythologies. So the show didn't just succeed on its own terms. It changed who got invited into animation and what kind of sensibility those people were allowed to bring with them. That's probably the simplest explanation for why Adventure Time still matters. It was playful without being shallow, emotional without getting stiff about it, and weird in a way that made the medium feel bigger. A lot of shows leave behind catchphrases. This one left behind a whole creative ecosystem, which is a pretty decent trick for an 11-minute cartoon. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.